This is Lisa from MobileTechReview, and now for something a little bit different. It's in its own little niche. It has a few competitors, though. This is the Acer Swift 3 OLED. So, there's a lot of Acer Swift 3 models out there with Ryzen processors, with Ultrabook processors. This one is different. Besides, obviously, in the name, we have an OLED display on board. We have Intel 12th generation H series processors, the 45 watts that you usually see in a gaming laptop or a mobile workstation. So for something that's 14 inches and is 17.9 millimeters thick, or thin, depending on how you look at it, that's pretty unusual for those who need more computational horsepower. And the display is an OLED with a 16:10 aspect ratio. So that's kind of nice, at a price range from $900 to $1,200. And there are a few competitors. There's the HP Pavilion Plus 14-inch and the Asus VivoBook 14X models too, that are doing the same thing as this, which is something you never thought anybody would have done, but we're going to look at it now. So what you get for the price is pretty nice. That OLED display is nice to look at. You get inky blacks, vibrant colors, P3 color gamut, and HDR 500 rating on it, which for OLED is okay, not bad, It's not a touchscreen, it is glossy. Glare is not too bad though on this. So we have an aluminum chassis, and build quality is pretty good on this. It doesn't feel creaky, squishy, things you might worry about when the price point is this low and you get some quality components inside. The design is the kind of, tapered wedge thing that we've seen for the last 10 to 15 years in sort of premium Ultrabook design, so it's okay. It weighs 3 pounds, which is around 1.4 kilograms, so it's not too heavy to carry either. So where the competitors haven't done as well as Acer is with actually putting the processor to good use. So if you get the $900 model, you get a Core i5-12500H, and if you get the i7, which is what we have, you get the 12700H processor. That 45-watt processor requires some cooling, so when you put it into the body of what looks like a 14-inch Ultrabook, you don't necessarily expect good performance here. And Acer gets the most performance out of the laptop of its competitors. So in part because though the cooling system isn't that huge, and we'll take a look at the internals on this, it's obviously very effective. 2 heat pipes, a fairly large, interestingly designed fan, and you've got some extra exhaust ports at the upper behind the keyboard area towards the rear there, and a lot of ventilation on the bottom. So whether you have this in the default balance or performance mode, you're going to see the best among its competitors that I mentioned in terms of performance. The only thing that's a little weird here, and you sort of wonder, other than for future proofing, which it's great for that, having this much processor performance, is who needs that much processor performance without graphics performance? We have Intel Iris Xe graphics on board, no dedicated graphics, which does help it to not melt and burn itself with that much heat inside the chassis, right? But typically when you want more horsepower, it's because you're doing video editing or Blender rendering or playing games and stuff. So that's not what this is for with integrated graphics on board. But if you're number crunching in Excel, I guess, and doing other computational heavy things, math, stuff like that, then it makes sense. And again, because it's future-proof, it will not seem slow in terms of processor speed 4 years down the road probably, because it's still going to be more powerful than most Ultrabooks on the market. If you get the low-end model, you get 8 gigs of low-power DDR5 RAM. If you get the higher-end Core i7 model, then you're going to get 16 gigs, and that's soldered on board, dual-channel RAM. It has a PCIe 4 SSD, either 512 gigabyte or 1 terabyte, depending on which tier of model you're picking. And there's a second M.2 slot for storage expansion, was nice. We also have Intel Killer Wi-Fi 6E on board, so they're not slouching on the other stuff so much. That's kind of nice for the price, again. The keyboard on this, now some reviewers have liked the keyboard. I find it a little lacking on the tactile feel. I would like a little more travel and feel on this, but it's a bit subjective there. Now, I think everybody's going to agree on the fact that when you have a light silver keyboard deck with light silver keys and white backlighting, you can imagine what happens there. When the backlighting comes on at middling lighting, anything that isn't really dark, it's going to make the key maskings actually harder to see. Not the first company that's ever made this mistake, and it probably won't be the last, apparently. Trackpad is made from recycled ocean glass, and it's Microsoft Precision. It's just fine and pleasant to use. Despite the processor performance in here, heat and noise are pretty well controlled. Again, the cooling system is pretty good and not as much throttling as we would have expected to see, so that's good. And certainly if you're using this for productivity work and streaming video and all that sort of thing, yeah, it's going to be fine. But the other star of the show here is that OLED 16:10 aspect ratio 14-inch display. It is nice looking. I think for consumption of any kind of media, you're going to love it. And, you know, if you're using it to edit photos and Photoshop and stuff, be mindful of the vivid colors. The calibration is decent on it. You can calibrate it yourself if you're a professional working on these things, but mostly the 2.8K display in terms of resolution is there to really knock your socks off when you're consuming content. It's good at that. The speakers on it are okay, companion-wise, you know, they're not up to the level of an OLED display, but in this price range and this size, thank goodness for a headphone jack, yeah? The 1080p webcam is a little better than average, and you have 2 mics on board as well, since these days Zoom calls are just not going away. Ports on board are pretty good too. 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports with USB-C configuration, one that will be used for the 100-watt charger, 2 USB-As, and an HDMI 2.1 jack on board as well, so that's not bad. As you might be wondering about battery life, given the more powerful processor and a fairly high-resolution OLED display, yeah, it's not great. It has a 57 watt-hour battery. I mean, a Dell XPS 13 Plus, 13.3-inch tiny little Ultrabook has that same battery and a much less demanding processor on board. So with the brightness set to 200 nits on the display, doing productivity work, average everyday things, streaming video, all that sort of thing, it's good for about 6 hours or so. If you're pushing it harder, which you might be prone to doing, given that you bought it because it had a more powerful processor in part, expect less. So yeah, Energizer Bunny level thing, this is not actually an Ultrabook with a U-series CPU either. We do have a fingerprint scanner in the power button, which is a perfectly great place to be putting the thing. Now, one thing I will note, nowadays you just don't see that much bloatware anymore on laptops. And boy, does this have bloat. You got Booking.com, you got a Dropbox promo, you've got Norton pre-installed. It's too much bloat, to be honest. So I spent a lot of time uninstalling a lot of this stuff before running my benchmarks. And I don't like seeing that. I know it helps lower the price of the product, but too much of it. All right, to get inside, you're going to unscrew Torx T5 screws. They're all around the edges and one in the center. They're all the same size, so you don't have to worry about keeping track of them. And the clips are pretty tight, but if you just stick a guitar pick in under the hinge area and pop, then it'll come right off. So, aluminum casing, aluminum cover, underside of aluminum cover. Obviously more ventilation than you might normally see because we have the more powerful processor. So here we have a fairly large fan with the stereo blade, something or other, whatever Acer calls it, that's actually quite effective, and 2 heat pipes here. And then we have, of course, the exhaust ventilation over here. So we've got a heatsink that's not too big, but it does the job. And just to trigger you OCD folks, here we have the Wi-Fi card smack in the middle at an angle. You know, you usually don't see the Wi-Fi card in the middle, but I guess, well, why not? The M.2 boot PCIe 4 SSD is right here with some heat tape on top of it. And there's a second slot, that's PCIe Gen 3, so if you wanted to add a second drive, you could do that. RAM is soldered on board. You can get it with 8 or 16 gigs, like I said, so that is what it is. Dual channel DDR5, low power DDR5 in fact. And stereo speakers flanking here, they're okay, nothing to write home about, they're decent enough, and then the 57 watt-hour battery is there. So that's the Acer Swift 3 OLED, a very unusual product with just a few competitors, like I said, but it gets the most performance going. The OLED display on this is very nice. The processor certainly gives you future-proofing. Build quality on this is pretty good. The keyboard masking is going to derange you a little bit. You'll just turn off the backlighting on the keys unless you truly are in a dark place. Other than that, it's actually really quite nice for the price. I'm Lisa from MobileTechReview. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.